Welcome back to Nightmare Theatre, with you as always, Arthur Pembroke. As I ready myself for tonight's story, there is a nasty little draught coming from the window. I've got the fireplace roaring to compensate for the cold air whistling through my bedroom, and of course, I have my steaming hot cup of tea. Tonight's tale is another original story, and I'll have another video story up based on a viewer's request that is a delightful tale, so stay tuned. Tonight's tale is Let Me Tell You the Story of How I Was Murdered. There's something unsettling about telling you this, not because I don't think you'll believe me, but because I'm not sure I even believe it myself. But it happened. Every last terrifying detail. This is the story of how I was murdered. The day it began was like any other. A dull, grey morning. The kind that makes you feel like the whole world's draped in a blanket of fog. I had a routine: wake up, shower, drive to work, spend 8 hours in a place I hated, then come home, eat and sleep. It wasn't glamorous, but it was familiar. That day felt off, though. Nothing I could put my finger on, just a creeping sensation gnawing at me from the inside out. You ever get that feeling like you're being watched, even when you're alone? That's how it started. At work, I kept glancing over my shoulder, sure that someone was staring at me, but no one was. Just rows of cubicles and blank, disinterested faces. I tried to shake it off. I told myself I was being paranoid, but that feeling only grew as the day wore on. By the time I left the office and stepped into the cool night air, it was nearly unbearable. The darkness seemed thicker, the shadows longer. My breath fogged in the air as I walked to my car, and I swear I heard footsteps behind me. I stopped, looked around. Nothing, no one. I was alone in the parking lot, but the sensation didn't leave me. The drive home was a blur. I was on autopilot, just trying to get back to the safety of my house. As soon as I walked through the door, I locked it behind me. I went through my usual routine, checked the windows, the back door. Everything was locked, just as I had left it that morning. Still, I couldn't shake the unease. I threw myself onto the couch, flicked on the TV, and tried to focus on some mindless show to distract myself. But the shadows in the corners of the room seemed to move, seemed to pulse, like they were alive. I felt trapped, like the walls were closing in around me. It got worse after I went to bed. I was drifting off when I heard something, a noise just outside my bedroom door. It was soft, almost imperceptible, but it was there, a faint shuffle like someone dragging their feet. My heart began to race. I sat up in bed, holding my breath. The noise stopped. I listened, but the house was silent. For a while I thought I imagined it. Maybe it was just the house settling or the wind outside. But then it came again, louder this time, a creak like a footstep. I lay there, frozen, staring at the door, waiting for it to open. My throat tightened, and I was paralyzed by fear. Someone was out there. I knew it. The knob twisted ever so slowly. I shot up, grabbed the nearest thing I could find, a lamp, and held it in front of me like a weapon. The door inched open just enough for me to see into the hallway. But there was nothing there. No one. I waited, my body trembling, but the hallway was empty. After what felt like hours, I crept toward the door and peered out into the dark. Nothing. I checked every room in the house. I looked behind the furniture, opened the closets, even checked the basement. No one. The doors and windows were still locked. The feeling of being watched hadn't left me, but I was alone. I must have spent half the night pacing, trying to calm myself down. By the time I finally crawled back into bed, it was nearly 3 a.m. I lay there, staring at the ceiling, too wired to sleep. Then I heard it again. The same creak, the same shuffle of footsteps, this time from inside my room. My blood turned to ice. Slowly, I turned my head toward the corner of the room where the shadows were darkest. And that's when I saw him. A figure stood there, tall, shrouded in darkness. I couldn't make out his face, but he was there, watching me. My throat went dry and I gripped the blanket, too terrified to move. He didn't speak. He just stood there, his presence thick and suffocating. I wanted to scream, to run, but I couldn't. My body wouldn't respond. All I could do was stare at the shape in the corner, my heart hammering in my chest. I squeezed my eyes shut, praying that when I opened them, he'd be gone. But when I opened them again, he had moved closer. I could feel him. The cold radiated off him like a shadow creeping over me. He stood at the foot of my bed now, his face hidden in the gloom. And then he spoke, just 2 words. "I'm here." I couldn't speak, couldn't breathe. He reached out, a hand that seemed to blur with the darkness and gripped my throat. His touch was ice cold, like death itself. I tried to fight, but I couldn't move. The pressure on my neck tightened, and I felt myself slipping away into the void. But before everything went black, he leaned closer, his face finally visible. And that's when I saw it. The face staring back at me was mine. Every feature, every detail identical. I was looking at myself, but there was no life behind those eyes, just emptiness. My own face twisted into a sick, twisted grin as I choked for breath. "I told you," he whispered, voice dripping with malice. "I'm here." The darkness swallowed me whole. When I woke up, it was morning. Sunlight filtered through the blinds, warm and golden. For a brief moment, I thought it had been a nightmare, but the bruises on my neck told me otherwise. I stumbled out of bed, my mind racing, trying to make sense of what had happened. I looked in the mirror, half expecting to see him, me, staring back. But it was just me, just my own reflection, gaunt and pale, eyes wide with fear. But then it hit me. I was no longer the same. Something had changed. Something darker had taken hold of me. The feeling of being watched hadn't gone away. It had grown stronger. It followed me everywhere, at work, at home, even in my sleep. I knew deep down that he was still there, waiting, watching, because he wasn't just a part of me. He was me. And the scariest part? He always had been. Thank you all again for joining me. Let me know what you think of tonight's story, or perhaps what types of stories you would like me to cover. And do me a favor. Take a nice long look at yourself in the mirror. Keep staring at yourself. You might start to feel a bit strange. Something might seem a bit off. Do you feel a disconnect or a glitch in reality, or do you feel the same as you always have?